At the beginning of the 3rd century, in the city of Nola, just 22 kilometers from Naples, a boy named Felix was born. The name meant happy in Latin, and no one in that family could have imagined how prophetic that name would be. His father, Hermias, was a retired Syrian centurion who had conquered fortune serving in the Roman legions. Now, owner of vast lands in Campania, he hoped his sons would follow the same path of glory and wealth he had walked. But something extraordinary was about to happen in that family. Felix had a younger brother, also named Hermias, in honor of their father. When the time came to choose their paths, this family's story split dramatically. The younger brother did exactly what the father expected. He joined the Roman army, followed the military career, embraced imperial honors and the security that money brought. It was the perfect script for a centurion's son in the Roman Empire. Felix, the firstborn and principal heir, did the absolute opposite. While his brother marched with the legions, Felix turned toward a persecuted, poor community considered criminal by Roman standards, the Christians. It was not a simple or romantic choice. It was the 3rd century, and the empire was in deep crisis. 26 emperors in 50 years. Instability everywhere. In that context, military career was the only safe harbor, the only guaranteed path to prosperity. Felix rejected all of that. Historical records show that Felix would become patron against lies and perjury, protector of those who seek truth, even when it costs dearly. He is also venerated as patron of spiders, domestic animals, and the city of Nola itself. But before understanding these patronages, we need to understand the impossible choice he made. Why would someone throw away an entire fortune, an enviable social position, and family approval to follow a path that could lead to prison or death? The answer to that question is not found in human logic or risk calculation. It lies in something the Roman world could not comprehend. The idea that true happiness does not come from what you inherit, but from what you are willing to renounce. Felix carried that secret in his very name. While his brother Hermias built a career and accumulated honors, Felix began a journey that would take him down paths no one in the Hermias family ever imagined. A journey where losing everything would be the beginning of gaining something that not even the Roman Empire could offer. The tension in that house must have been palpable. Imagine the military father looking at his 2 sons, one who made him proud following in his footsteps, another who confused him by rejecting everything he had fought for. But Felix had found something that would change not only his life, but the course of Christian history in the following centuries. And it all began with a choice that seemed like madness, trading swords for faith, security for persecution, the visible for the invisible. Felix grew up in an environment of privilege and clear expectations. As the firstborn son of a retired centurion, he received the typical education of the Syrian Roman elite, preparation for public life, knowledge of the empire's laws, and all the training necessary to assume the role of heir. His father Hermias had built a solid legacy through military service and now owned extensive properties in Campania. Felix's path seemed traced from the cradle: administer the lands, expand the family fortune, perhaps even follow a political or military career, as so many centurions' sons did. But something troubled young Felix. While his younger brother enthusiastically embraced the father's military stories and dreamed of glory in the legions, Felix showed a strange attraction to something completely different. In 3rd century Nola, Christianity was still a marginal religion, practiced in secret, viewed with suspicion by authorities. It was not the kind of thing that attracted sons of the Roman elite, yet Felix began discreetly attending Christian gatherings, hearing teachings that contrasted radically with everything he knew. It was a time of deep contradictions in the empire. The years between 220 and 240 were marked by what is called the crisis of the 3rd century. Emperors rose and fell at alarming speed, borders were constantly threatened, and the economy staggered. In that chaotic scenario, military career represented the only true safe harbor. Felix's father knew this from his own experience. He had served, retired wealthy, bought land, secured his children's future. It was the tested and approved formula for survival and prosperity. Testimonies from the era reveal that Felix was not rebellious or problematic. He fulfilled his obligations, respected the family, participated in the social life expected of someone in his position. But there was a division growing within him, the tension between following the safe path everyone expected and responding to a calling he could barely explain. While the empire offered security through power and wealth, that small Christian community spoke of a completely different kingdom, where the last would be first and where losing one's life meant finding it. The contrast with his younger brother made everything more evident. Hermias Jr. had no doubts. He would wear the armor, serve the emperor, build his own fortune. It was the logical path, the honorable path, the path that made sense to any sensible person. Felix saw his brother follow exactly in their father's footsteps and knew that he himself, as firstborn, should lead that path. But the closer he got to the Christian community, the clearer it became that he did not belong to that world of swords and conquests. Felix's formation was not marked by dramatic events or sudden conversions. It was a slow awakening to a truth that inverted everything he had learned. True inheritance is not what you receive, but what you choose to carry. And Felix was beginning to understand that the weight of the cross the Christians spoke of was very different from the weight of the military honors his father carried. The question that tormented him was simple and terrifying. Would he have the courage to reject everything his family had worked for, to embrace something the world considered complete madness? The death of Father Hermias changed everything. As firstborn, Felix had the right to most of the inheritance: fertile lands, urban properties, valuable political connections, everything a young man of the Roman elite could desire. It was the moment when he should assume the role of family patriarch, manage the business, guarantee the prosperity of future generations. His younger brother was already established in military career, following the paternal legacy. Now it was Felix's turn to consolidate the family empire that Hermias had built with so much effort. But Felix did something that shocked all of Nola. He liquidated almost the entire inheritance. He sold the properties, converted everything to cash, and distributed it to the poor of the region. He kept no security reserves, created no emergency funds, maintained no minimum patrimony for difficult times. He kept only a small part, just enough to survive in an extremely simple way. And then, without having worked a single secular day in his life, without having built a career or professional reputation, Felix presented himself for priestly ordination. Imagine the scandal: the centurion Hermias' son, heir to vast properties, throwing everything away to serve a persecuted religion. His brother Hermias Jr., already established in military career, must have seen this as complete betrayal of the paternal legacy. Nola's elite, who expected to see Felix administer the family lands and perhaps even enter local politics, saw an act of inexplicable madness. Why would someone deliberately destroy everything a family had built with so much sacrifice? Felix was ordained presbyter by Maximus, Bishop of Nola. It was not a position of power as a bishopric would be, but it was sufficient for Felix to serve. He did not seek authority, status, or recognition. He wanted only one thing: to live the gospel in the most radical way possible, and his understanding of radicality was frightening. While other presbyters maintained properties and material security, Felix chose absolute voluntary poverty. He gave everything because he literally believed every word Christ said about renouncing riches. But Felix's choice was not only spiritual, it was also deeply practical and dangerous. The Roman Empire was in the midst of the Decian persecution, one of the most systematic and brutal attempts to eradicate Christianity. An imperial edict required all citizens to sacrifice to the Roman gods and obtain certificates proving the act. Refusal was a capital crime. Thousands of Christians bought false certificates to escape persecution. Others fled to the interior, hoping the storm would pass. Felix did neither. When the authorities came to arrest him, Felix did not initially flee because there was a more urgent problem. Maximus, his bishop and mentor, was too sick to escape. During the Decian persecution, bishops were primary targets because dismantling leadership was an effective strategy to destroy entire communities. Felix knew the pattern: arrest the bishop, torture him publicly, force him to renounce the faith before the population. It was a spectacle of terror designed to crush Christian morale. Felix made an extraordinary choice. He put Maximus on his back, literally, and carried him out of the city during the night. A sick man, probably unable to walk alone, transported for kilometers across rough terrain. It was not a romantic escape or epic adventure. It was brutal exhaustion, constant danger of being discovered, each step possibly the last. Felix hid Maximus on an isolated property outside Nola and ensured he had sufficient provisions to survive. Then Felix returned. This part is crucial. He did not need to return. He could have stayed hidden with Maximus, waited for the persecution to pass, protected his own life. But Felix understood something profound about the gospel. You do not hide when the sheep are in danger. The Christian flock of Nola was facing arrests, torture, impossible choices between renouncing faith or dying. The bishop was protected, but the people needed pastoral care. Felix deliberately returned to the center of the storm. The Roman authorities arrested him almost immediately, and then began the true test of Felix's faith. Torture in the Roman era was not punishment, it was a method of information extraction. They wanted to know where Maximus was hidden. They wanted the names of other Christian leaders. They wanted Felix to publicly renounce and encourage others to do the same. The intensity and duration of torture varied according to the prisoner's resistance, but historical records suggest Felix endured prolonged sessions without yielding. Think about what this means practically. We are not talking about psychological pressure or verbal threats. We are talking about physical pain designed to break human will. Whips with metal tips, tearing flesh, deliberately dislocated joints, stress positions maintained for hours until muscles began to tear. The goal was not to kill quickly, but to extract information through prolonged suffering. Felix did not speak. He did not hand over Maximus. He did not reveal any names. He did not renounce Christ. Eventually, the authorities realized they could not break Felix through torture. So they threw him into a prison cell, probably hoping that hunger, thirst, and inhuman conditions would do what physical pain had failed to do. Roman prisons of that era were basically holes in the ground, dark, fetid, infested with disease. Prisoners died of infections, malnutrition, dehydration. It was slow death, and the authorities knew that families often begged prisoners to yield just to end the suffering. It was in that prison that one of the strangest and most specific miracles in Christian history occurred. And here we must understand something about miracles. They rarely happen the way we expect. We want angels with flaming swords, chains breaking supernaturally, prison walls collapsing. But God, in his infinite and sometimes bewildering wisdom, sent a spider. Tradition tells that Felix, weakened by torture and imprisonment, prayed asking for liberation. And then, during the night, a spider began weaving a web at the entrance to his cell. It was an ordinary web, the kind anyone could destroy with a hand movement. But that web had divine purpose. When the guards came to check on Felix the following morning, they saw the intact web and assumed no one had entered or left the cell during the night. They did not check inside. Felix, perceiving the miraculous opportunity, escaped. Modern critics may see this story as legend or exaggeration, but contemporary records from Paulinus of Nola, writing a few centuries later, treat the event as historical fact. And there is a deep theological reason for this specific miracle. God chose the most fragile creature possible to save his servant. A spider can be crushed with a finger. It has no power, no status, nothing the world would consider useful. And that was exactly what God used to defeat the power of Rome. Felix fled again, this time to the mountains around Nola. He hid in an abandoned property, probably one of many that the 3rd century's economic crisis had left deserted. He lived there as a fugitive for months, perhaps years. We do not have exact records of the duration, but we know these were times of extreme deprivation. Felix, who had been raised in wealth and educated to administer lands, was reduced to living like a hunted animal, hiding in ruins, depending on the occasional charity of Christians brave enough to help him. During this period of hiding, Felix developed the practice that would define the rest of his life. He owned only 2 coats. When someone appeared in need, Felix gave the better one, kept the worse, always, without exceptions. It was not a unique or occasional gesture, it was a life system. And here is the radical challenge. he did not give the old or torn coat. He gave exactly the coat he himself would have preferred to keep. It is easy to be generous with what remains, difficult to give the best when you only have two. This practice of the two coats reveals something profound about Felix's theology. He did not see charity as distribution of surplus, but as constant participation in others' suffering. When you give the better coat, you literally wear the other person's suffering. You feel the cold they would feel. You experience the discomfort they would experience. It is not generosity at a distance, it is incarnate solidarity. Felix lived this for decades, never keeping the best for himself, always consciously choosing the inferior portion. The Decian persecution eventually ended. The emperor died in battle in 251, and his successor did not continue the systematic policy of Christian persecution. Felix, finally safe, emerged from his hiding place, but the man who came out of the mountains was fundamentally different from the young priest who had been arrested. Years of deprivation, torture, flight, life in shadows had refined Felix in ways even he could not have predicted. He had learned something that is only learned by losing everything, that God is sufficient when God is all you have. Felix returned to Nola and did something surprising. Instead of resuming a prominent position in the Christian community, he bought 3 acres of arid land on the city's outskirts, land so poor that no one else wanted to cultivate it. And there, with his own hands, Felix began working as a farmer. A man who had been educated to administer large properties, who should be supervising other farmers, was now plowing, planting, harvesting personally. It was not romanticization of poverty or performative gesture of humility. Felix literally needed to eat, and the only way he knew to earn honest sustenance was working the land. So he worked. He woke before dawn, toiled under Campania's scorching sun, returned exhausted at dusk. Hands that had been created to hold pens and parchments, now calloused with hoes and sickles. A back that should only carry the weight of administrative responsibilities now ached from brutal manual labor. But Felix found something in those 3 acres that no inheritance could have given: freedom. Freedom from social expectations, freedom from the need to impress, freedom from maintaining appearances. He owned so little, he had nothing to lose. And when you have nothing to lose, you discover you also have nothing to fear. This is the radical inversion of the gospel that Felix lived. Total dispossession leads to absolute security, not in things, but in God. And then something happened that Felix never expected. Maximus, the bishop he had saved, died. The Diocese of Nola needed a new leader, and the entire Christian community, along with the remaining presbyters, had a unanimous choice: Felix. It was obvious. He had demonstrated courage under torture. He had risked everything to save the previous bishop. He had lived years as a fugitive rather than renounce faith. He was clearly the most spiritually qualified person to lead the Church of Nola. Felix refused. And here is the detail many modern historians forget. He did not refuse out of performative modesty or false humility. Felix refused for a specific technical reason. He had been ordained presbyter 7 days after Quintus, another local presbyter, and according to the canonical practice of the time, ordination precedence mattered. Technically, Quintus had priority. Most people would have ignored this detail. 7 days difference when you saved the previous bishop and survived torture. No one would have questioned Felix if he had accepted the bishopric, but Felix insisted. Quintus should be bishop, and so it was. Felix continued as presbyter, returned to his 3 acres, continued working the land with his hands. He showed no bitterness or resentment. He did not murmur about denied recognition or procedural injustice. He simply continued living, planting, pastorally shepherding when called, always giving the better coat. For Felix, refusing the bishopric was as natural as refusing the inheritance decades earlier. He did not seek positions, he sought faithfulness. The following years were marked by radical simplicity. Felix remained on his small farm, lived modestly from his own work, served the Christian community of Nola when necessary. He never accumulated anything beyond the minimum to survive. He continued the practice of the 2 coats until the end of his life, and when he died on January 14th of approximately 260, he left no wealth, left no impressive properties, left nothing the world considers important legacy. What Felix left was something infinitely more precious, an example of how to live the gospel without compromise. And it was precisely that example that captured Christians' imagination in the following centuries. His tomb in Nola became a pilgrimage center. 5 basilicas were built around it. Paulinus of Nola, a converted Roman senator, became doorkeeper of one of those basilicas. He followed exactly the pattern Felix had established decades before, rejecting status to embrace service. Paulinus wrote 14 annual poems about Felix, celebrating his life on the anniversary of his death. In those writings, he developed one of the first theological concepts of confessor of the faith, someone who lives in a state of constant martyrdom, ready to die at any moment even though God does not require blood. It was through Felix that the church began to understand that disposition matters as much as execution, that living ready to lose everything is as valuable as actually losing everything. Pope Damasus was healed after pilgrimage to the tomb. Augustine, Gregory of Tours, Bede the Venerable all wrote about the priest-farmer who never wanted to be bishop. And Felix's most powerful legacy was not built in episcopal palaces, but on 3 acres of arid land, cultivated with the calloused hands of a man who understood that true greatness is measured by what you refuse, not by what you conquer. Felix's story teaches us something profound about how God operates in the world. When the Roman Empire sent its legions, its bureaucracy of death, its prisons designed for torture, God did not respond with angelic armies or overwhelming manifestations of power. He sent a spider, a creature that can be crushed with a finger, that lives on the margin of human visibility, that the world considers insignificant. And that spider did what all the legions of Rome could not prevent. It protected a man of faith and kept the flame of the gospel alive in Nola. This divine choice was not accidental. It reveals a pattern that runs through all scripture and church history. God prefers to use the fragile to confound the strong, the despised to shame the powerful, the unlikely to accomplish the impossible. Felix understood this inverted logic better than most. That is why he refused inheritance when he could have secured wealth. That is why he refused the bishopric when he could have embraced power. That is why he always gave the better coat when he could have kept it for himself. He lived in the exact opposite of what the world considers wisdom. And it was precisely that chosen weakness that made him so powerful. Think about this. Felix is patron against lies and perjury. Why? Because while the entire Roman world lied, buying false sacrifice certificates to escape persecution, Felix refused to lie even when it meant prison and extreme suffering. He paid the absolute price for absolute truth. There is no middle ground in Felix's life, no strategic compromise, no up to a certain point. It is all or nothing. It always was. Paulinus of Nola, writing centuries later, used Felix to define a revolutionary concept, the confessor of the faith. It is not only one who sheds blood in public martyrdom, but one who lives in a permanent state of willingness to lose everything. Felix did not die executed, but he lived each day as if execution could come. His entire life was an interior martyrdom, a daily death to the world and its seductions. God accepted that disposition as sufficient, because what matters is not only how you die, but how you live ready to die. The practical lesson for us is uncomfortable. We live in a society obsessed with self-promotion, accumulation, guaranteed security, contingency plans. Felix represents the opposite of that. He challenges us to ask, what if true happiness comes from dispossession, not from accumulation? What if real strength lies in refusing power, not in conquering it? What if God wants to use precisely our fragility, not our impressive capacity? These are questions that have no easy answers, because they demand radical transformation of values. The test of the 2 coats that Felix practiced all his life is not a beautiful metaphor, it is a concrete challenge. Next time you have 2 versions of something, 2 cell phones, 2 pairs of shoes, 2 clothing options, try giving the better one, not what remains. Feel what happens inside you when you must choose to keep the worse. That internal resistance reveals how much we are still trapped in the world's logic, in the need to guarantee the best for ourselves. Felix shows us that true freedom begins exactly when you manage to let go of what the world says you should hold with all your strength. Felix was born heir to fortune and died a poor farmer. Between those 2 points, he lived one of the most radical stories of renunciation and generosity the Church has ever witnessed. He refused inheritance when he could have guaranteed security. He survived torture when he could have fled. He refused the bishopric when everyone wanted him as leader. He always gave the better coat when he could have kept it for himself. And he died on January 14th, approximately in the year 260, in simple peace on a small 3-acre farm, leaving a legacy that would inspire saints for centuries. His tomb became the center of 5 basilicas in Nola. Paulinus of Nola, a converted Roman senator, served as doorkeeper of one of them. Pope Damasus sought healing in pilgrimage to his tomb. Augustine, Gregory of Tours, Bede the Venerable, all wrote about him. The Church celebrates him on January 14th as confessor of the faith, recognizing that he lived in a state of constant martyrdom, even without shedding blood in public execution. But Felix's legacy is not only in history books, it is in the impossible questions he left for each of us. If you are being pressured to follow family tradition, even when your heart points toward a completely different direction, Felix has something to say. He chose Christ over his father's military dynasty and discovered that honoring parents does not mean imitating them blindly. It means having the courage to follow the calling God placed specifically in you, even when it disappoints family expectations. The tension is real, the pain is legitimate, but the peace that comes from obeying the divine calling surpasses any human approval. If you feel you deserve a promotion, recognition, a leadership position that everyone agrees should be yours, remember that Felix refused the bishopric for 7 days' technical difference that only he considered important. True humility is not measured in grandiose public gestures, but in microscopic details that no one but God sees. It is easy to be humble when everyone is watching. The real test comes when you could take something that is legitimately yours, and no one would judge you for it, but you choose not to take it for reasons that only make sense in the invisible kingdom. If you live in survival mode, accumulating security, because the world teaches you never have enough, Felix lived the absolute opposite. He chose voluntary poverty, insane generosity, refusal of all material guarantee in an era 1,000 times more unstable than ours. Daily willingness to lose everything is the modern martyrdom few are willing to embrace. What if God is waiting for precisely your chosen fragility to manifest his power? The spider that saved Felix was crushable, but it was exactly why God used it. Your vulnerability may be the perfect channel for miracles that strength would never produce. Live Felix's paradox. Be happy, as his name promised, through dispossessing yourself, as his life proved. The world shouts that you need to accumulate to be happy. Felix whispers that you need to let go to be free. Radical experiment for this week. Identify one thing you have duplicated, anything. Give the better version to someone who needs it more. Not what remains, not what is old, but exactly what you would prefer to keep. Then comment. What was harder? Choosing what to give or choosing to give the best? Felix was not happy despite dispossessing himself. He was happy because he dispossessed himself. And that secret, simple and terrifying, continues waiting for whoever has the courage to test it in their own life.